Welcome, everyone. This video is about the epistemological and analysis implications of doing complexity science research. If you are a researcher, if you are someone who is using complex systems thinking, or trying to research complex systems in general, and thinking about using and applying complexity science methodologies or a method, this video would be really perfect for you, because I will go through some ideas, some really important concepts to think about that have implications for the epistemology and the analysis that you will be doing to study complex systems thinking in your area of research. The material reference, just so you are aware, is from an article called Complexity Thinking, a Middle Way for Analysts, and it was published in the journal Emergence. The main authors are Richardson, Celiers, and Lussac, and it was published in 2001, but still very relevant, I think, and you would find it very useful. And I've included the full reference here for you. So firstly and briefly, I will explain the theory of complexity science before we go into the idea of something called incompressibility and its epistemological implication for analysis. In theory of complexity science, is focused on understanding how parts of a system function, and also the interactions between these parts and how these interactions decide the identity of the parts as well as the entire system. So this is the theory of complexity science. Also, it is important to note that we deal with open systems when it comes to complex systems. We are here dealing with open systems because everything is connected to everything else. So the idea of having a distinct system becomes very blurred, which has implications for our analysis because we don't know where the boundaries are of our analysis. Another thing that you need to understand is that it can be very difficult to associate effect with cause in complex systems, because a complex adaptive system is a system that consists of a big number of entities that show a high level of interaction. The nature of this interaction is mostly nonlinear, consisting of feedback loops, which I explained in several other videos on YouTube before. This nonlinear interaction also puts a limitation on our ability to validate models of complex systems, whether they are mental or mathematical models. Finally, the authors talked about basic observations that you need to know that are characteristic of these complex systems. So let's go through these. This will take some time, and I've listed them before, but they are really important for you to know. First, complex systems have memory and history, captured at both the micro and the macro levels, at the personal and as well as outside levels. So having a system history is important because it defines the state of the system and enables analysts to get a better understanding of the existing state of a system that does not fall under one person's point of view or worldview. Second, the system might adopt a diversity of behaviors. This happens due to the nonlinear nature of the relationships that explain the interaction between the different system parts. Third, there is a deterministic chaos based on the system evolution being possibly sensitive to small disruptions, and there is also self-organization when the system is possibly insensitive to large disruptions. There are also possibilities that sit in between chaos and also self-organization. And fourth, complex systems are incompressible, meaning it is difficult to describe a complex system without losing some of its aspects. This incompressibility characteristics characteristic, is considered by the authors the single most critical aspect of complex systems that you need to be aware of because of its implication on any analytical methodology or epistemology, which is the subject of this video. So let's discuss in the next slides the implications of this last feature of incompressibility on analysis in more detail. So as I just explained, in complex systems, everything is connected to everything else, directly and indirectly. That is why the concept of a boundary is a problem, or a perceived boundary, if you like, is a problem of any complex system. Even if we include physical boundaries on complex systems, these don't mean they are correct boundaries for, sense making. Also, even if we use boundaries in previous studies, these don't mean they are appropriate again, even if we are dealing with similar situations. The boundary analysts include around a system, the boundary that we include as analysts around a system, are about our need for a bounded description and not a feature of a system itself. This is something that we impose on complex systems. Boundaries are guided by our study or research purpose and are drawn where we want them to be. So perceived boundaries are transient and hard boundaries do not exist in nature. So let's talk about this paradox of incompressibility of complex systems and its implication on analysis. So if we model a system and its parts, then there will always be something outside of that boundary that we created that would affect the system's behavior in some way at some time. So this may make some of our models and assumptions inappropriate, and we need to have the mentality of taking nothing for granted. To model any complex system accurately means we would have to model life, our universe, and everything around us. This sounds impossible, right? That is exactly why our use of the term system can be misleading, because it gives the impression that there are completely autonomous entities that exist out there. The authors, in fact, go further of this article. They go further and even suggest renaming complexity science as the science of partial complex systems. This is because it suggests that we are investigating part of a complex system. So what does this incompressibility characteristic mean for analysis? It means the possibility that there is a globally and permanently valid perspective or paradigm. It means that this whole idea that there is a permanent, valid perspective or a paradigm is not feasible. It's not realistic. It also means that no perspective, no paradigm or framework that can describe in total any subsystem embedded within the complex system that we are studying. So we have to acknowledge that any analysis of any problem is underpinned by a limited perspective, and we must be humble about it and be okay about it. Without this, we will continue with the belief that our understanding that we put to the world is true and defines all that is possible. So the authors argue for a paradigm-less approach towards analysis where categorization of any sort is avoided. Now, one thing you need to know and understand if you are doing complex systems analysis is that when it comes to this incompressibility feature or characteristic that I just talked about, context is of critical importance. So what do I mean by that? Say you have a complex systems model that you have developed and you are thinking of applying it to the future operation of the system you studied deeply. Can you do this in reality? Well, the authors of the paper say that qualitative changes in context would prevent this application because the new context would be qualitatively different to another because of the subjectivity involved that we use so some factors might be overlooked during the process. The authors argue that the discussion on this incompressibility characteristic sits across a continuum. Knowledge is very context-specific, which makes understanding in other contexts a futile exercise. Knowledge also is based on a particular context that could be valid for a bounded range of other contexts. However, this validity should never be taken for granted. So the advice is for you that you should also treat frameworks out there with a healthy skepticism if you want to make use of them in particular circumstances. And in this case, I would use the example of my project. When I did my PhD, I made sure during the thesis writing, and I wrote this down, is that this framework that I'm using is really there to help me, and it is very specific to the context of the research that I was doing. So this is important to keep in mind. So all this discussion so far about the nature of complex systems thinking would have implications on when it comes to epistemology, the truths we discover concerning systems. First of all, our efforts to rigidly, if you like, define the boundaries of the complexity paradigm is, the authors argue, contradictory to the fundamental complexity message. For example, any attempts to chunk the area of analysis into distinct paradigms is misleading. Complexity thinking is about breaking away from traditional paradigm-based thinking and what they called the, bear with me, fussification, that is making this fuzzy, if you like, of the boundaries that allow the recognition of boundaries. So any boundaries should be viewed as provisional and they should be viewed as local. As the system evolves, we also may need to change our sense-making boundaries along the way. Another implication is that we need to consider a number of perspectives. This is very important. This will give us a richer appreciation of the state of affairs or the problem situation we are analyzing or researching, and would lead to a more informed decision-making along the way. When we consider many perspectives, we need to also negotiate between these. Any merits or deficiencies would be examined in light of both the supporting and the contradictory evidence offered by the other perspectives. These could take the form of individual experiences, a number, output of a computer model, and so on. This exploration of different perspectives would also help identify other perspectives that could be worthy of inclusion. After you finish exploring these different perspectives, you should be left out with a number of viewpoints that are considered acceptable. This may happen in different ways. The creativity that comes from the differences between the different perspectives or perspectives may naturally converge or combine, or by a particular perspective becoming dominant during this process while you are analyzing. To sum all of this, a complexity-based epistemology really needs and requires the exploration of different perspectives. The greater the number of perspectives available, the more in-depth the scrutiny of each perspective will be, and the deeper or broader the scrutiny, the higher the possibilities are of recognizing the value or not of other perspectives. So related to the above point about having a variety of perspectives, is that in complexity-based analysis, there is no dominant perspective that bounds your analysis. The analysis should be more of a democratic style that acknowledges the rights and value of different viewpoints by different people, or whether, in the form of modeling methods or subjective viewpoints, that is. One thing important to note is that this way of complexity-based analysis, of considering a number of perspectives during analysis, may complicate things, especially for policymakers. because there are endless possibilities there that such paradigmatic freedom offers, which may give the uncomfortable impression that there is a paralysis by analysis, what the authors called paralysis by analysis. So how do you deal with this? The author's advice is that managers must manage the variety of perspectives and also facilitate along the way while doing this complex systems analysis. Again, in my PhD, because I considered a number of perspectives from different participants, some academics, even those close to my research, found it really uncomfortable and even challenged me during presentations about how to, if you like, operationalize my findings, which involved, using different perspectives and tapped into different areas related to policy, related to say, design in my case, related to planning. This is where I had to really explain how complexity-based analysis work, in that it is about inviting different views, different opinions, and discussing and challenging rather than coming up with a list of actions that are off the shelf that people, policymakers can use. Because you're dealing with complexity here. So what frameworks might support such a perspective-based dialogue and facilitation or negotiation? Well, the author's advice is any attempt to operationalize a well-defined framework would contradict the underlying philosophy of complexity-based analysis. However, to help, we have to accept that frameworks are critical in providing a starting point or a focus for analysis. What you have to be aware of is that any theoretical insights that underpin your framework should not be used to determine your explorations, but it should be more of a direction or a source of creativity to fuel further, exploration. Overall, this type of analysis and way of thinking and doing things needs creativity, it needs criticism, and it needs plural methodologies. So I hope this video gave you an appreciation and really understanding and some tips and some concepts that you need to deal with and you need to understand if you are doing complexity science research, if you are researching complex systems, because these have got very specific implications for epistemology and the analysis that you are doing.